Okay, so we talked about the 5 steps of multiplication of viruses, and we looked at this in terms of an acute infection, where you become infected, you multiply virus, it spreads, and eventually the immune system will stop this from happening. But there's something else that happens in with a lot of viral infection, where the acute infection it doesn't keep going on, and the and you don't get these outward symptoms like this. There's something that can happen with viral infections, with certain viruses. This would be unique to certain viruses. And that would be to get a persistent infection. And so think of that word persistent. You're persisting. You're not going away. So this is a general term. We say a persistent infection as opposed to an acute infection. The virus is not eliminated from the body following infection. It's persisting in the body. There's 2 main kinds of persistent infections that I wanted to talk about, and I think you'll be able to relate to. One of them is called chronic continuous infection. So let's think about that. If acute means you get an infection, you get the signs and symptoms, you get sick, and then your immune system gets to work and you get better. That's an acute infection. A chronic infection is you get infected, you get the signs and symptoms, you get sick, but you just don't clear your body of that virus. It's chronic. It's chronically growing in the body. When we say you have a chronic infection, the infection, meaning the pathogen, remains in your body. So the chronic continuous infection is when the virus keeps growing slowly. And some of the examples that you're probably familiar with, HIV is a really good example we're almost all familiar with. So HIV, you're probably familiar, human immunodeficiency virus, sexually transmitted disease or bloodborne pathogen. It stays in certain white blood cells, in T cells. And it can grow very slowly, and somebody can actually have an active infection for a very long period of time. And we know that this can happen for many years, and eventually the virus takes over the body, and it will, if left untreated, will kill people. The same thing can happen with hepatitis B and C. These are the 2 really common viruses that affect the liver. So again, you can have an active virus growing, making you sick over many, many years, and ultimately resulting in death because of this infection. Measles, I told you, is an acute infection. Here's a kid with an acute measles infection. And the people that argue against measles vaccine say, oh, well, this is all you get. You might feel lousy for a week, but then you'll be okay. And that can happen. You know, you can get sick for a week and you can get better and never be any worse off for it. But sometimes, and it's rare, but it does happen, measles virus can become a chronic continuous infection. It is this subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. Is that what it was? It ends up affecting the brain. And so in a small percentage of measles patients, patients get this chronic infection in the brain, and that can be deadly. So there are these chronic continuous infections that some viruses are able to do. Another kind of a persistent infection that you might be a little more familiar with is called a latent infection. So remember, persistent infection just means one where the virus is not eliminated from the body. It can be chronic continuous, meaning the pathogen's continuing to grow over a long period of time. Or in the latent infection, the virus isn't growing anymore. It's just there. It's dormant. So you're not showing any signs or symptoms of illness while it's laying dormant. But what happens is it can become activated, and then you can show signs and symptoms. Classic latent infections are caused by herpes viruses that cause oral and genital herpes. And the virus that causes chickenpox and shingles can result in a latent infection. So I'm going to elaborate on this in the next slide. So I want you to understand the relationship between chickenpox and shingles. So when somebody has chickenpox, it's caused by the varicella-zoster virus. You don't have to remember that, but that's what it's caused by. And the varicella-zoster virus is actually in the family of herpes viruses, just like oral and genital herpes. They're related. They're similar viruses. And so most of us are familiar with the idea of getting chickenpox. You get infected with this virus, and it causes acute infection, like we showed on the previous picture. And it multiplies, and then the immune system gets caught up, and you get better. So in my generation, they did not have chickenpox vaccine. So almost every kid got chickenpox. I had chickenpox when I was a kid. And that's, it's again with, just like measles, like you might get chickenpox and be sick for a week, but you're probably going to get better. You're probably going to have it'll probably be a relatively short period of time. Complications are relatively rare, but everybody gets it. It's really contagious. It's something that everybody will get. So chickenpox is caused by this varicella-zoster virus, and it causes acute infection. But instead of the virus being eliminated from the body after the infection, varicella-zoster in everybody who gets chickenpox hangs out in some of the nerves of the host. So because I had chickenpox when I was a kid, I have varicella-zoster virus sitting in some of my nerves right now. And if that becomes activated, so we say it's in the nerves in a latent form. It's a latent virus. It's dormant. It's not making me sick. I have, no effects right now. But if it becomes active, it causes a disease called shingles. And so they're showing you here chickenpox versus shingles. They kind of look alike, but shingles tends to be a little bit more pustulely, a little bit different. Another big thing about shingles. So here's talking about shingles. After this person gets chickenpox, after they get chickenpox, there are certain. So here's a picture of the nervous system. You got the spinal cord going along here. All these nerves coming off, all these yellow things are nerves coming off. They're all kind of plugged into the spinal cord, right along, the sides of the spinal cord. And that's where the shingles virus can hide. They're hiding in the neurons along the spinal cord and or along the nerves coming off there. Okay. And so when it becomes activated, for example, if this nerve becomes activated, that shingles comes out, the virus is going to come out into the nerve to where it's attached. And if you look at this person right here, so if this is where their spinal cord is, down the middle, notice that this rash is coming out in a line, and it's coming out in a line, and it's coming out in lines. And those lines are the same pattern that you see with the nerves. So shingles is the latent form of the varicella-zoster virus. It's the latent form of the chickenpox virus that is sitting in the base of the spine, and it can literally sit there for decades. In fact, it's more common for it to sit there for decades because this healthy person's immune system is preventing that shingles virus from multiplying. But as we get older, just like everything, our immune systems start to wear out. Or when you're under a lot of stress, or you have an autoimmune disease, all of those things can have impacts on the immune system and allow shingles for the virus to be released and cause cause what we call shingles. Shingles is incredibly painful. I know of somebody who had shingles for a solid year. They couldn't get rid of it, and it hurt so much that she didn't wear a shirt when she was in the house. It was so painful just for cloth to touch it. So this can be very painful. If you get it on your face, it can cause blindness. If it gets near your eyes, but it's painful and it can be debilitating and it can take a long time to get rid of. The thing I always like to warn people about, if you ever think you're getting shingles, how would you know? Somebody in my family called me one morning and said, "Oh my gosh, I have this terrible rash going across my chest." And when she said across, I immediately thought shingles because I'm thinking of the nerves going in lines across your chest. And I said, "Is it itchy or painful?" And she said, "It is painful." And I said, "Get to your clinic or your emergency room as soon as you can, like now, because the sooner you can get an antiviral medication, the sooner you'll get rid of shingles." Now, most of you guys will never have to worry about shingles because you've had chickenpox vaccines. And chickenpox vaccines will prevent you from getting varicella zoster, and therefore it will prevent you from getting the latent form of varicella zoster, which is called shingles. On the other hand, me, who had chickenpox, I've gotten a shingles vaccine, which is actually a mega dose of a chickenpox vaccine. I think you get it twice. So this is something, chickenpox, let's go back and look at our terminology. Shingles is a persistent infection, meaning the virus, once you have chickenpox, the virus is not eliminated from your body. It stays in your nerves, but it stays in your nerves in a latent form. It lays there dormant until the virus is activated by stress, age, old age, or stress, age, other things. When we get oral and genital herpes, they are also latent viruses. And just like shingles virus stays in nerves, the herpes virus does too. The different herpes virus, there's an HSV1, herpes simplex virus 1, that stays up in these nerves up by your face. So they come when you get a cold sore. It is a result of that herpes simplex virus 1. And what happened right here is that's the end of a nerve where that virus is latent. If you get cold sores, you are very likely to get them in the same place over and over again. I have one. Mine's up here. And I don't know, every once in a while I get really stressed out. A lot of times at the beginning of the semester. And I'll get a cold sore. Somehow my herpes got activated. After many years of getting this once a year for many years, all of a sudden I got one down here, right across from where the other one was. And what I believe happened is the oozing stuff that came out of this one infected a nerve down here, and now I have another latent nerve that has latent virus in it. So cold sores are a result from latent form of herpes simplex virus, and this is something that could pop up your rest of your life. If you have genital herpes, it's herpes simplex virus 2. It just prefers the conditions of this part of the body. And so it's residing in some of these nerves and comes out in the genitals instead of in the mouth. You can, public service announcement here, if you have a cold sore and you give somebody oral sex, you can transfer HSV1 to the genitals, and you can get cold sores on the genitals. They're apparently not as severe as if you get HSV2 cold sores, typical genital herpes. But in any situation, when you feel like you're getting a cold sore or you have a cold sore, it's recommended to keep your mouth to yourself until it's completely healed up. Anyway, and there are some good over-the-counter medicines to help with oral and genital herpes. I don't know if the genital is over the counter, but there are good medications you can use. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this section was the idea of an oncogenic virus. If you've ever heard of somebody with an oncologist, they are unfortunate enough to have a cancer doctor. So an oncogenic virus are viruses that cause cancers. So, turns out there are a lot of viruses that cause cancer, or a lot of cancers caused by viruses. Here I have 13 to 25%, depending on what kind of cancer, depending on who's doing the statistics, what numbers they're looking at. But 13 to 25% of human cancers are estimated to be caused by viruses. And these viruses disrupt how the cells divide. So you are probably aware that cancer is just uncontrollable division of cells. Our own cells aren't dividing normally. So there are some viruses, when they infect your cells, they can cause our own cells to divide uncontrollably and cause cancer. Some of them that you've heard of, probably the one you might have heard of the most, is HPV, human papillomavirus, also known as genital warts. Almost all cervical cancers. You know that for women, the pap smear every year, the pap smear is testing for cervical cancer. Why do we get cervical cancer? From papillomavirus. You know the best way to prevent getting cervical cancer, short of never having intercourse, is to get the HPV vaccine. And most people will get it when they're before they're sexually active, when they're in middle school age. And it's one of the most effective vaccines, and has little or no side effects. So HPV vaccine is really good. It says HPV cancers have increased. It can be prevented with the HPV vaccine. So this is something that's recommended to prevent cancer. And even though men don't get cervical cancer, men do get genital warts, and even without signs and symptoms, can transfer them between women. Hepatitis virus. Hepatitis is a, like I said, it's inflammation of the liver, and almost all liver cancer is caused by hepatitis virus. So when you get one of those chronic diseases, the chronic continuous infection with hepatitis B or C, they can lead to liver cancer. There's other ones you might have heard of: Burkitt's lymphoma, Hodgkin's disease, Kaposi sarcoma. All of these are cancers that are caused by viruses, and therefore we call them oncogenic viruses. I'm going to stop right there, and we have one more video.